Mountains Mandate. All of these terms, all of these people are obviously a very big part of the discussion that you've been hearing, the political narrative of what's been driving a huge swath of the electorate over the course of the past, certainly couple of years, certainly 2025, but more importantly, over the past couple of decades. And so I wanted to speak today and talk about a fantastic book that you all need to be picking up if you want to get better acquainted with the rise of Christian nationalism. It's a book called The Seven Mountains Mandate. And if you don't know what the Seven Mountains Mandate is, we're going to be talking about it with Professor Matthew Bodie today. Professor Bodie is a professor at North Georgia. Help me again.
The University of North Georgia. Just add North to Georgia. Yeah.
University of North Georgia.
Yeah.
We've known each other on social media. We've interacted, had some conversations, but I wanted the professor. I've read his book, which is uniquely timed because the professor was targeted by Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk due to his opposition to Charlie Kirk's position of pushing to allow concealed carry guns on college campuses. Presumably, I would imagine, Professor, as a way of self-defense and preventing gun atrocities, I guess.
Sure, if that happens a lot, yeah. The good guys and the bad guys get confused sometimes when you have lots of guns.
And so the Professor Bodie was put on a watch list, a professor's watch list, because of this activity. Unbeknownst to him, it just kind of, I think, appeared one day. We're going to have you walk us through and talk about it. He started getting contact information harassment nationally about this because you had the audacity to say, maybe this isn't a good idea. Maybe there's a better way of approaching and preventing gun violence than allowing college students who are just turning of drinking age to be concealed carrying.
Right.
So, Professor, we're going to talk about your life and how you got to where you're at and what happened. And we're certainly going to explore the book a little bit, but can you kind of start with how this emerged in 2016 and then, because this was before the book.
Oh yeah. Well,
right?
before. Yeah, certainly.
Well before.
Yeah.
So walk us through that beginning and then kind of
Sure.
what inspired the book, because I'm sure they're probably related at some point.
No. Yeah. So, in 2016, I was a year into my professor job at North Georgia. And to be honest with you, I'd never heard of the school before. I applied for a job there. So if you're having trouble remembering it, that's fine. And around that same time, of course, there was an election going on, and Turning Point, again, a group at that time that very few people had heard of. I had not heard of them. And they were trying to make their moment. Charlie Kirk had jumped on the Trump train, so that was helping. And then after the election, and sometimes in December of that year, they released what's called their professor watch list. And it was a list of about 100 professors that they were targeting, that they wanted other people to watch for various opinions that they didn't like. At that time, Turning Point was very, of course, anti-higher education more broadly, but certainly a gun rights organization. And you can see how that thing's turned into targeting me, because a couple of months before, I had written an opinion piece for our local Atlanta paper arguing that we should not allow concealed weapons on college campuses, which is now a law in Georgia. The last time I checked, I think there were probably 13 states that allow that. Georgia was the 10th. And we had been debating that for a year or so. And I had talked to lawmakers, and the governor vetoed an initial bill, and then it came around again. And so I thought I was just writing something that, local people would read. And a couple months later, Turning Point found that and put me on their list. That basically the list is, of course, they have a link to what it is you write, but they also have your name and your picture and your contact information. And they were kind enough to use a picture from my wedding, which is, on one of the photographer's website. And to be honest with you, I didn't think much of it because nobody knew who Turning Point was at that point. But they used that moment to go viral, to go national. And everyone figured out and discovered who they were. I mean, we had professors volunteering to be on the list because, as they called it, it was a McCarthy-style kind of thing. Now, Turning Point is not the first group to target professors or to make a list, but they made their name based upon that. So out of 100, almost 10 years ago now, there are probably close to 1,000 people on that list now. And when I write the book, I was researching who is on the list and why they're on the list. And Turning Point loves lists. They got a school board watch list now that school board members they don't like. They have something called the Dean's List, which seems to be universities that they do like or they grade them, which is kind of surprising. And so throughout the years, I wrote about Turning Point. One of the few people to kind of do that on a regular basis because they weren't well known for several years. Even after that, I started a blog to fact check Charlie Kirk. And once Biden came into office, they became really important. Of course, they participated and aligned themselves with the insurrection in 2021. But really, their national kind of anti government, anti elite, anti Biden tyranny thing really came into play obviously during COVID. And I say that because then they started to change who they were. Turning Point and Charlie Kirk were a kind of a libertarian in big government, in the national debt. One of their first phrases that went viral was "big government sucks." But around the time of COVID, because of Charlie Kirk's influence by other people, they became a Christian nationalism organization. And at that point, the streams kinda came together for me. I was kind of targeted by them, and I was writing about them on a blog, kind of a hobby, but doing my day job. And then when they switched to Christian nationalism, that directly moved into what I write about as a professor, which is religious rhetoric. And I knew exactly when I first heard Charlie Kirk speak at a CPAC event about the 7 areas of cultural influence and that Donald Trump understood them. I knew exactly what he was getting at. I had heard that phrase before. The 7 mountains is a Christian nationalism strategy. So really since 2020-ish, Charlie Kirk has turned his organization into a Christian nationalism organization. And at that point, I would say they started paying attention to me because I would appear on blogs or podcasts. And my profile on the Professor Watch List has been updated several times. It's kind of funny. I did a blog in Arizona, not a blog, but a podcast in Arizona, and the people running it told me that some Turning Point people had signed up for it because I could tell by the email addresses. And I just thought it was very funny that they were going to listen to a podcast in Arizona to hear what I had to say. But then they wrote about it on my profile. So we get to the book. Somebody called me, "Hey, do you want to write a book?" I'm like, "Sure. What do I say about Charlie Kirk and 7 Mountains?" So we kind of did that. And then, of course, then he was assassinated.
What,
Um,
what what year did you begin writing the book? When was the idea to write a book on the Seven Mountains Mandate?
um, I think that I mainly wrote it in the summer of 2024. And we signed a contract in March of that year, and I spent most of the summer doing it and editing it. And the manuscript was due like in January of 2025. So it was mainly a 2024 book. What leading up to that point, the change in Turning Point that I talked about, how they spent their $100 million budget. They have an arm of Turning Point for all these 7 areas. So up to really 2024, what was Turning Point doing? And to be honest with you, we didn't put Charlie Kirk or Turning Point in the title or on the cover because me and the publisher agreed. Very few people knew who they were. I mean, Charlie Kirk is kind of known as a Fox News guy. He has a radio show, but I mean, I speak to a lot of groups now, and one of the first questions I asked is, how many people had heard of Charlie Kirk before he was shot? And like maybe a third, maybe a quarter of the people did that. So the main character, if you will, in the story is Charlie Kirk, but the 7 Mountains Mandate is much bigger than he is. He is an heir to that. So writing the book in 2024, it came out. It was finished, ready to go. I sent it all to the publisher in early 2025. As you know, that process takes a while. So by September, people were getting it in their mailboxes. And if you look on some of those book review websites like Goodreads, they will write, "Hey, I got this book and I was reading it when he was shot, and I had to put it down, or I picked it up when he was shot." So the timing of the book is ironic, definitely.
So the book we're talking about is The Seven Mountains Mandate by Professor Matthew Bodie, one of the professors, probably one of the more prominent professors who was targeted by Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. We'll get into a little bit more as to why. I mean, the setup was right. You opposed concealed carry permits for students on college campuses. That alone kind of puts you on this list, this targeted list where your name, where you work, personal information is put. It's kind of done with a wink, wink, right? Like
Right,
this,
right.
watch this professor, but we all
Right.
know what that kind of means.
Yes.
But moreover, can you explain to those that are uninitiated on what the 7 spheres of cultural influence or the 7 mountains are and
Sure.
why they are so resonant, what they mean to people.
Yeah, so it's a list of 7 cultural institutions, and if I had to, ask you to do that without having read this book, you probably could name them. Sometimes I leave one off the list when I do, but it's government, business, family, media, entertainment, religion, and I always forget one. Uh,
Academia.
education. Sorry, and then that involves obviously K through 12. So these areas, the metaphor of the mountains, I'll explain in a minute, but there are 7, as you point out, areas of cultural influence, cultural institutions, if you will, that make our society. And the idea behind the 7 mountains mandate was to retake these cultural institutions, to take them back for Jesus, because the implication is that secular forces or anti-Christian forces or anti-Christian people are running these. I mean, we can think about pretty easily in the mountain of media. They talk about secularization of media and anti-Christian bias in media, so that's pretty obvious. But the metaphor of the mountains happened when a guy named Lance Wallnau, who was a prominent player in this group of people that published or pushed Donald Trump to the election. He is was a teacher, if you will, of Charlie Kirk. He came up with a metaphor of the mountains, and he's kind of the father of the 7 mountains. He wrote a famous book on Trump in 2016, and before that, his thing was these 7 areas. He didn't come up with the list himself, but he is kind of known as the person who made it go national or go viral in the early 2000s. He got the list from a guy named Lauren Cunningham, who was a head of a global Christian mission organization called Youth with a Mission. And Lauren Cunningham had met a guy named Bill Bright, who was the head of Campus Crusade for Christ in August of 1975. And they were meeting because they each had this, according to stories that you read, this kind of deep spiritual need to tell each other about what God had put on their heart. And magically, spiritually, God had put on their heart this exact list for both of them to share with each other. So in 75, you can imagine Christians really reeling from changes in the culture, certainly from the 60s, but also many things from the 70s. And these 2 people who had already been very successful at converting, evangelizing college students, and certainly Bill Bright, I think, is a bit more well known. They wanted to go beyond that. They wanted to go beyond campuses and fix the nation. One of the quotes in the book is that Bill Bright wanted to fix the nation's ills with this wide-ranging plan to influence society in these areas. And I want to emphasize that word influence because over the years, with Lance Wallnau's help, it moved from influence to sort of a takeover, a technical word called dominion. So they wanted to have individual Christians atop these mountains that have run these institutions, but also kind of a generic Christian consensus in our culture of these 7 areas, that our culture would be Christian because these areas would display this consensus. The last thing I want to say about the mountain mandate is that it's a minority movement on purpose. Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham and Lance Wallnau and Charlie Kirk are not interested in primarily evangelizing people so the majority of America are Christian. When they say we are a Christian nation, 1, they mean this Christian culture, and 2, they mean the we, which is this minority of people who would run the show, who would be the most powerful people in the culture, and somehow that Christianity of theirs would seep down into the rest of us. So it's a minority movement on purpose, and which to me makes it then, kind of a red flag for democracy. So the subtitle of the book is To Christianize America and Destroy Democracy. They will use democratic elements and democratic levers of power, but really what they are about is Christianizing America through institutions, not individuals, not converting, evangelizing, but changing the level of institutions.
It's really important to understand again that thank you, Professor, for that history because this is the mid 70s are the time where you start to see this countercultural backlash in conservative circles.
Mm-hmm.
This response to the 60s, right? This age when baby boomers are coming of age, and there's this sense that all of these institutions have either been corrupted or captured
Mm-hmm.
by the
Yep.
American left, and we've got to get them back. And what I think is unique is it also converges with sort of the Jesus movement, which is
Yeah.
becoming a big part of the 1970s, and also sort of the rise of the anti-government sentiment that Reagan comes to ultimately define and realizes they need a coalition too. The smaller government coalition needs to work with religious affiliated, sort of the religious right starts to become starts to become a thing. And there is an internal debate that was happening. That was, do we use the power of government that we have to drive the culture and society that we want, or do we go upstream and change the culture and society and let that seep down to government?
Mm,
I'll bring that up only because this is a really storied, less listened to component
mhm,
of that moment and that age, because you had sort of the rise of Reaganism that had a different approach, but was very much in coalition
mhm,
with the religious right. There was no longer sort of a tacit, arrangements to work with these folks. It was an overt appeal
mhm,
to religious sentiment, and started, not for the first time in our history, but really begins to compound this idea that we should be a Christian nation and biblical citizens. And you
mm.
talk about the idea of biblical citizenship in the book a little bit, and you
Certainly.
explore what that means and kind of what obligation is when you
Yeah.
embody that.
So there are many churches around America, mainly charismatic, evangelical might be the broader term, that have classes that teach this idea of biblical citizenship. And of course, it implies that these citizens are reading their Bible, but really it is about having these people work at different levels of government and culture to take them over. So they train them on how to run for school board or city council, and you think, well, those are pretty maybe partisan groups, but pretty generic, get stuff done government. But what they want to do, of course, is institute curriculum that reflects the Seven Mountains mandate in schools or in the city government. They want city policies to reflect the Bible. There are groups out there that within the Seven Mountains mandate that they see themselves or see the church as city councils. And this is a metaphor that Charlie Kirk used that I write about in the book, that he sees these, um, we'll say, pseudo city councils, these group of elders of churches that would oversee the city, that would perhaps be on actual city councils or act like city councils, because they want to train and develop and lead citizens to go out and not just run for school board or run for city council, but take over their city. It's kind of I mean I compared it to the movie Footloose. If you think about that original movie and the remake, right? As a small town, they didn't allow dancing because one of the people on the city council was the preacher, and they had to convince him to have a dance, right outside the town limit. So it's that idea. But you think about then, oh, that's just a local thing. Well, the Seven Mountains mandate nationalizes. There's a great verse in the Bible, and I want to point this out that Charlie Kirk and other people misuse, abuse, twist to make this a national issue. The back in the Jewish exile times, there was a verse that says, stay in this city which you've been exiled to, because if the city is prosperous, so will you be prosperous. Well, Charlie changes the word city to nation. And that's how we get really a lot of the national policies here, border policies, immigration policies, healthcare policies, because he wants the nation to reflect the Bible. As you mentioned, there was a time in Reagan, when this kind of came together. Obviously, Jimmy Carter, president before that, they kind of evangelicals moved on from him. But I want to point out California is really important in this story because Bill Bright centered in California. Lauren Cunningham, for a time, lived in California, and not just Reagan, but obviously a lot of Orange County people. But really, what California did was the Jesus movement. The four fathers of the Jesus movement taught a guy named Rob McCoy. He was a pastor, is still is a megachurch pastor in California, and he taught Charlie Kirk the Seven Mountains mandate. So you can see the importance of this line that you just laid out from the '70s on, and that's why I call Charlie Kirk the heir to this movement, because he literally was taught by someone before this, who was taught by someone before this.
So those who've read my book know I'm from a small city in Ventura County named Moore Park. Rob McCoy is from Thousand Oaks, which is a city right next
Mm,
to Moore Park. We're both from Ventura County. Orange County, which is south. Ventura County is north of LA County. Just south of LA County is Orange County. That's where a lot of this evangelical charismatic
mm,
catalyst for the seven spheres of influence and cultural influence, this ideology was sort of baked and cooked and
mm,
born, as you correctly point out. It's a really fascinating study and understanding. You obviously touch on it throughout the book, and there's a lot of books that have been written on and are increasingly more scholarship coming out on Christian nationalism, its origins, why it's motivating people, end times theology. A lot of these folks were at January 6th, were involved in the insurrection on J6. It's become really a global movement. As you mentioned, it's a global church that is trying to argue that secular government is the devil's work.
Yeah.
That the goal is to you have as a spiritual warrior, you have an obligation as a Christian to fight the demonic secular government sort of in our midst. And one of the best ways to do that is through the capture of culture.
Yeah.
Now, Professor, you started writing this in the summer of 2024.
Mhm.
Um, and you basically go to print and editing and publishing. I know that whole process
Yeah.
from having gone through it myself, but one of the reasons I want to have this conversation is the timeliness of this book was extraordinary, of
Mm.
course, because Charlie Kirk is shot in late spring of last year, 2025, right as your book comes out, and you're kind of struck as the reader because the beginning a part of the book is you're talking about Charlie Kirk sort of in the this is who he is, this is what he's done, as though he's still alive, because when you're
Mm.
writing it, he was.
Right, right,
And then
right.
and then you go to print like right at that time, and it's a really fascinating, I think, perspective for this time. And again, long segue, apologize for that. But what I want to get to is what does Charlie Kirk's death and what you're seeing in Turning Point mean for where this is all heading, or does it even matter?
Yeah, I've gotten that question a lot, as you might imagine. What is the future for Turning Point after Charlie Kirk was assassinated on September the 10th in Utah? Um, I think that two things. One, we're still in, or they're still in. I think everybody a little bit is, but the grieving, emotional phrase. He's gone. I can't, take that. And of course, we saw that really with every campus event that was done in September and October, November, even through Christmas. And so it really was an ongoing memorial for him. And I think that they're still talking about doing things in Charlie's name, whether it's a policy or doing campus events or individual college students starting a chapter. So that will continue on, I think, at least for the next year. I think that Turning Point's built to last, though, and I say built to last because there are organizations, nonprofit organizations that lose their founder or lose their leader, and over time they do fade. I think Turning Point's built to last because of the Seven Mountains Mandate. They are involved in so many things in so many areas that if one falters or they decide not to put enough money in one area, they have all these other areas to work in. So they're the Seven Mountains Mandate, they're the first organization to go after all seven at one time or to put money in all seven. I mean, Heritage Foundation and other groups do education and they do government, but Turning Point's doing all seven. So they're built to last. Now, they were built on two things. One, these campus events, these debate me, these under the tent, prove me wrong events that Charlie Kirk spearheaded. And they plan to do those in the spring. I don't think Erica's going to show up. She's not that person. She is the CEO now. But I do think we're going to have to see how they tie their newfound movement. Again, a lot of people were introduced to Turning Point during his memorial service for the first time, and they really did a good job of marketing themselves as a faith and freedom and family organization, kind of a generic Christian organization, and a lot of new chapters, a lot of new people involved, and that pipeline is going to continue to grow. So the question is, do they get the money? Do they get the donations? Yes, they continued or to do that. They just got a $10 million donation to rename their building after the person who gave them money. They're $150 million organization that will keep going. Then also, of course, their biggest, most recent impact was on the 2024 election. They started Turning Point Action, took over the Republican Party, knocked on a million doors, and got Donald Trump elected. They might not have the same success in the midterms as that because everybody's saying, it's going to change, but they've already endorsed a slate of candidates and most of those candidates are going to win. So they do set themselves up. And I think Charlie was setting them Turning Point up as the post MAGA institution, the post MAGA
Mm.
organization. I think they will continue to point toward that. They've already endorsed JD Vance for president. So as long as they have money and impact and powerful players in their pocket, they will be around for quite a while. And I think all three of those things will continue for many years.
Do you think a charismatic leader like a Charlie Kirk is what's gonna replace, Eric Kirk will be the functional CEO, but there's a lot of, at
Yeah.
least online anyway, there's a lot of dissension, high high
Yeah.
profile right-wing influencer fights over her and who Charlie was and what his real legacy is and what he meant.
Mhm.
Or does each mountain have its own director kind of in charge of where this goes? Or what is it what does it
I think
practically
that,
look like?
Turning Point has now become a brand itself. Yes, you don't replace Charlie. No one's gonna replace his individual worth and value and skill and talent. I think they have different people doing different things. The radio show is gonna go away. Some people have already replaced his hours, but you do have all these other arms. So I think they'll find individual people to do individual things. You don't replace individual Charlies, but I think what I'm getting at is because they're a brand now, people wanna be with them. And that brand really is powerful. It inspires people to create chapters. If you think about, a high school kid who's interested in Turning Point, they could be as a freshman in high school and then graduate from college. That's 8 years worth of being taught by them. And then what do you do when you graduate from college? You could become a Turning Point faith chapter leader or anything along those lines, or work on staff for Turning Point. So they have a pipeline that will continue to grow. And as they said at the memorial service, we are Charlie Kirk now. There'll be millions of Charlie Kirk. I think that's exactly what they intend to do. There'll be some direction from the home office in Arizona, but they're they won't be individual based upon their founder anymore. They will be a movement and a brand themselves.
Do we know where the funding is coming from? I mean, this is not small donors. This is
No,
from
no.
a tranche of very large.
It's kinda hard to say, when they release their taxes every year, their 990s. We get some indication of different high profile groups that donate to them, and they make their own donations. Let's not kid ourselves as well. I mean, Coke money does eventually flow to them. There's some big conservative family foundation, from Illinois and from Texas, and you can see that in some of the tax returns. And their original founders or the original donors like Foster Price have died. But I mean, most of the high profile, let's say non-politicians that speak at their events are donors. So again, with the person that just donated $10 million to get their name on the building, she was a speaker at the most recent event. So you can kind of guess why they're speaking at those events. But I do want to say, as much as they do have big donations, and um, they do get many small donors and many kind of grassroots people that donate $5 or $10 or buy Charlie Kirk's book for 50 and all that. And they have a large merchandise business. I mean, they sell hoodies now about, martyrdom over tyranny. They sell stickers about, again, that show freedom of the t-shirt that they sell those actual t-shirts that Charlie Kirk was killed in. So they have a wide ranging business that is just not big donors, even though they get that. It's kind of hard to track the money sometimes because of the tax records, but really what you see is just go look at the GoFundMe's that were set up to give money to Erica after Charlie's death. I mean, she doesn't need it, but millions of dollars were raised and some big names put millions of dollars in. But if you look at GoFundMe, it's $5, $10, praise God, I pray for you kind of thing. So they have a wide range of donors.
So I look, I was never I didn't know much about Charlie Kirk. I certainly knew who he was from
Mhm.
online persona. I never really thought it was particularly substantive what he was doing, but he
Mhm.
clearly was having a very significant impact, right?
Yeah.
He was the perfect spokesperson for the digital age and for a generation that communicated that way. And I think he intuitively understood that. But even a cursory understanding of who Charlie Kirk was and when he did grow up was this was an acolyte of the Rush Limbaugh era in talk
Mhm.
radio.
Mhm.
There's stories about him kind of emulating and
Yep.
trying to, talk more like Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh was a character who was very much in the old classic Reagan conservative, small government, played footsies with the
Mhm.
kind of the Christian element of the party,
Yeah.
would suggest that this was a Christian nation, but I don't know that Rush Limbaugh would say that, that he would be an adherent, at least in his time of Turning Point USA. The reason why I'm bringing this up is this question. What was the inflection point? Where does Charlie Kirk go from being a Rush Limbaugh adherent to saying, "Nope, what this is really about is Christian nationalism"?
Mm. You know, So again, Turning Point started as this kind of Charlie described himself as a conservative libertarian, again against big
Right.
government, against the national debt, certainly
Which
against
is not a Christian nationalist. I mean,
no,
Christian
not at all, not
nationalism is
right, right.
clear statism. Like
Yes,
we'll
right,
use big government to accomplish our
yeah.
aims all day long.
And even in the first Trump term, he still was not that. I mean, he certainly
Right.
was on the Trump train and was not that. So if we go back to Rob McCoy, who's a pastor or retired pastor in now California, and he meets Charlie Kirk at this CPAC event, and I think targets Charlie Kirk in a way. He's looking for someone he can pass his legacy of Christian nationalism down to, and he just happens to run across Charlie Kirk. He's heard of them. He's been growing. This is 2019 ish, and they talked a couple of times. And the stories that both of them tell is that Charlie Kirk was convinced by Rob McCoy that the Seven Mountains is both theologically correct, but also good for business. And I want to emphasize that. I think Charlie Kirk believes in the Seven Mountains. I think he believes Christian nationalism. He calls himself a Christian and a nationalist, so I call him a Christian nationalist. But he also saw the business opportunity here. I mean, Turning Point was not struggling in 2019, but they were kind of repeating every year these campus events, and they were gaining some momentum. And Turning Point had Trump at many events. But now that you think about that, was just one of the seven mountains, education, and a particular part of education, right? Now they are involved in every single area of our culture. And they're repeating many of the lines you've heard with Reagan and cultural conservatives from Jerry Falwell to any down the line there. He's repeating all those things, but he's moving it into a new generation of churchgoers who hadn't heard it, who maybe thought about it with their parents, but now it's presented in a much more impactful way as Charlie Kirk does. So I think that Rob McCoy presented it to him as, hey, the Bible does talk about the government, but also look at all the people you could impact. Right, that's always the sell to preachers. You can get a bigger brand with the gospel if you uh, all these people impact. So I didn't think it took that much for Charlie Kirk to do a 180, and that's what he did. Let's be honest. He said in 2018, "I don't sell my politics with religion. I sell them in a secular fashion because America is a secular nation." A year later, he is saying the opposite. So he did it, I think, because he changed his mind, but also it has turned out to be a tremendous business opportunity.
Good business opportunity.
Yes, very
So
much.
so so with that in mind, um, how much we discussed this a little bit, but I am fascinated by the idea that I mean, look, these are not small amounts of money.
Mm,
These are extraordinarily large dollar figures that are moving into and through Turning Point. There are a lot of consultants and staff members making enormous sums of money. How how much does that begin to play into the um the continuance of what Turning Point was designed to be? Let me rephrase that a little bit. How much of the glue of the whole MAGA movement and all of the tentacles underneath it were how much of the of that glue was Charlie Kirk? What does
mm.
his leaving the stage mean for the business side of it, the money side of it, and the disparate coalition side? Because one of the fascinating things to me is all of these different segments of the GOP base, which are far less ideological and far more personal now.
Mm.
They're like, who's got these larger social media networks. Charlie Kirk, in many ways, was kind of keeping a lid on all of these people from fighting with one another. I think one of his greatest skills was keeping everybody from attacking one another. And once
Right.
he leaves the scene, it just comes in full ugly
Mm.
display where Candace Owens is going against Megyn Kelly, is going against Ben
Yeah.
Shapiro, is going against Tucker Carlson, going against Trump on Epstein files. I mean, it's just kind of like a free for all. You can't even track who's against who at any given day.
Mm. Yes, people have called Charlie Kirk the glue to the conservative movement, and certainly I think he played that role because um, being young, being a center of power. Again, he was a Trump whisperer for a while, but he was his own center of power there. And because he had that avenue to a large voting bloc, both young people and middle aged people and Christian conservatives, he kept the message on. Think about Turning Point itself, right? is very good at being on message. I mean, from every single influencer that they have to their videos to everything, they know how to run a message. And you can see that when they do the AmFest, every semester or every winter in Arizona. So they know how to be on message. And even the people that leave Turning Point, and sometimes when they leave, it's at a negative fashion because they get kicked out for various reasons, Candace being one of them, they don't overtake or they can't battle that messaging from Turning Point. Turning Point is a really powerful organization because of that. Now, when you lose Charlie, you lose that ability, I think, to stay on message. I do think that Turning Point struggled there, not just with Nick Fuentes and all the racist things he says, but I think with Candace, because Candace, I don't say came out of nowhere, but kept on with her conspiracy theories, and Turning Point didn't want to address it because they wanted to stay on message. So when you start to think about how messaging works and how to stay on message, someone that keeps knocking at you, you eventually have to answer them. And they kind of did, and then they moved on. But really, what Turning Point does is it's a behemoth organization because while it's headquartered in Arizona, they have people everywhere in every major city, and most college campuses. So they can go from the top to the bottom and always on message. So Charlie was that person. And that's why I think you see the fractures after his death. It wasn't so much Turning Point staffers battling with each other. It's some people trying to take the message from them because they controlled it in certain audiences for a long time.
And you don't see that being successful despite his leaving the scene.
No, because what Turning Point is now doing, I mean, they have this martyrdom, this emotion on their side. You can attack them and try to do them, and Candace has tried, but really her audience is very much different than Turning Point's audience, even though that you think they come from the same, cloth. And the more that Turning Point presents itself as a faith and family organization, the more they can push away the far right and Nick Fuentes. The more that they remind people that Charlie Kirk was pro-Israel, the more that they can push against that. I think that they will continue on. They might lose a couple of on the edges, a couple on the margins, but really their message will continue on because they have this emotional center now. How long that lasts, I don't know, but I mean, you don't go up attacking Erica. I don't want to say bad things about Erica. I don't think anybody else does. So, you really have that emotional center now where people don't want to fight with them. Candace being the difference there.
Are you surprised at the extraordinary influence that Turning Point developed from the first days when you heard of them in 2016, 2017 when they were attacking you? Or does it all kind of make sense and you could see it coming?
Oh, I'm certainly not a prophet, as much as Charlie Kirk is called a prophet. I think that they're very good at going viral. So you get a bunch of those moments in a row. I mean, the Professor watch list, Big Government Sucks, and then you had a couple of ones after that really set them up success, and that's why he was able to convince Donald Trump Jr., hey, Trump should come to our events. We have a following now. I think that, you know, they're also very good at not just being on social media. I mean, they're a training organization. They really do a good job in giving talking points and bumper sticker theology to their followers, both at their events, but also through their, outside those events. And so their campus people really are on message. So I think that they were building a case to be a big organization. Now, once Trump started attending these events, it just took off because anything that he gives his megaphone to is going to spread. But they also were doing the work of organizing and spreading and making critical strategic decisions, like to expand into the Seven Mountains mandate, so that by 2024, wait, what do you have? You have Turning Point Action taking over the Republican Party. You have Turning Point Faith bringing those evangelicals to vote for Trump. And then you have literally Donald Trump Jr. and his father saying, Charlie Kirk is a kingmaker. I mean, it did come together in that way. I don't think Charlie saw it coming together in that way. So I can't that I said that happened, but he has very good people who work for him and he's made very good business decisions to come to this point.
And there's no question this is a sophisticated communications operation. I would argue first and foremost, right? I mean, they knew that this was a business decision. They knew that there was an audience hungry for this. They got the investments to do the analytic work, to do the digital outreach, to produce highly produced videos, contents, and then the echo chamber to kind of ricochet this stuff throughout not just the right-wing media
Right.
ecosystem, but all over the internet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, so if you think about hashtags, and you think those are pretty easy to do, but getting a viral hashtag is really hard. I've tried, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, really, they understand how to operate social media. I mean, Charlie Kirk was one guy with a Twitter account tweeting at Donald Trump in 2012, "Hey, I'm starting this organization. Would you help me out?" He didn't reply. But I think that eventually they found different people and brought all those audiences together underneath the brand of Turning Point, like Benny Johnson had a big following and then came on to Turning Point. Alex Clark, the female Maha people, they've developed their brand while in Turning Point. But really, what they've done is given them free reign to be creative and to try different things, but also doing it in front of audiences that are, I think, going to accept anything they do. I mean, if you think about college clubs and chapters, really they're going to clap for just about anything that they promote. So I do think that Turning Point was successful at sending their message out, getting it out on not just social media, but finding ways to. I don't want to use the word dumb down, but I mean, finding ways to filter their message so it does not come across as Christian nationalism, does not come across as far right, does not come across as racist or anything in those lines. I mean, faith, family, and freedom. Who can be against that if you hear that at a funeral service?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the pernicious element of the whole thing is what they're really selling is conservative politics wrapped in Christianity and giving it the veneer of virtue, right? It's
Mm.
not just that you're right politically, it's that you're on the side of righteousness and God. The book that we're talking about is The Seven Mountains Mandate. Professor Bodie has been joining us. This book is exposing the dangerous plan to Christianize America and destroy democracy. Professor Bodie, how can people follow you and learn more about the book? Where can they buy the book?
They can buy the book at Amazon or my publisher, Westminster John Knox Press. I'm on Substack now. I just started a new account, and you can follow me there. I'm on Twitter/X and Blue Sky, all at Matthew Bodie, MatthewBoedy.
Wonderful. Let me ask you one last question before we depart here, which is um, in 10 years from now, will Turning Point be a stronger influence in America or a weaker one?
I think it does depend upon whether or not they are able to elect JD Vance. If they lose that, I think they weaken and they don't get the anti tyranny movement back again. If they win, I mean, the sky's the limit.
Got it. Professor, thank you so much for your time. Everybody pick up the book. Follow Professor Matthew Bodie on Substack, on Twitter. Help amplify that voice. Educate yourself more on what is going on. And we will talk to you all in just a little bit.